Need some advice on how to draft the perfect team for the 2008 NFL season? You have come to the right place. I'm Larry Beal. This is our fantasy football draft special. Joining me, Yahoo Sports fantasy gurus, Brandon Funston and Brad Evans, with their top 5 draft tips. Brad, let's start out with the running backs, and you're looking for a workhorse back.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, you got to saddle the workhorse back. Last season, there were only 6 300-carry running backs. That was down from 10 in both 05 and 06. They're an endangered species, the LTs of the world, and because of that, it's actually increased their value overall. You want to make sure if you have a top 7 or 8 pick this year, you go out and get a guy like Tomlinson, a Steven Jackson, a Brian Westbrook, the guy you know who's going to get guaranteed touches almost every single down and reach that 300 level because they're going to be incredibly valuable this season. So definitely go out and get the workhorse back.
Hey, Brandon, a lot of fantasy owners think automatically they've got to take a running back in the first round. You say it's okay to take Tom Brady or Randy Moss. Give me your reasoning.
Well, Larry, I've been in experts drafts in the past where 22 of the first 24 picks were running backs. And as Brad said, the 300-carry back is a dinosaur these days. The fewest since the calendar flipped to 2000, the fewest 300-carry running backs last season. Conversely, the most 100-carry running backs since the calendar flipped from 2000. So there's a lot more platoons going on. So once you get past those top guys, those top 300-carry backs, then there's really not those guys left anymore. Now you can argue that there's probably half of the top 30 picks overall. You can argue should be a combination of wide receivers and quarterbacks. There's a contingency of about 8 to 10 really elite wide receivers, and there's 3 or 4 really great quarterbacks. So once you get past those top guys, you look into that late first round, second round, definitely time to start looking at wide receivers and even the best of the best quarterbacks.
Brad, it seems like the pattern in a lot of drafts is follow the leader. One guy takes a quarterback, and then suddenly everybody else, quarterback. Your advice to owners would be, what do you do in this situation?
Well, if we're going to specifically talk about quarterbacks, don't freak out if Tom Brady goes early, Tony Romo goes early in your draft, Peyton Manning. That's going to be expected. And there's going to be a quarterback run probably in your draft around round 4 for the next tier of guys. But keep in mind this. Last year, the difference between Tony Romo, the number 2 quarterback overall, and Carson Palmer, the number 9 quarterback overall in fantasy points per game, was just 3.7 points per game. That's a very slim, a very marginal difference between those two. If you miss out on the elite tier of guys, there's always another train coming, as they say, in the quarterback realm. A guy like Aaron Rodgers, Jay Cutler, David Garrard will be very, very good. Every year between rounds 5 through 9, a top 5 quarterback is yielded. Last year was Romo and Favre. In 06, it was Drew Brees. And I think this year it would be either Cutler, Garrard, or Aaron Rodgers.
Brandon, what do you mean when you say know your bye weeks?
Well, specifically, I mean know your bye weeks for when. One thing I don't like to do is you take a kicker and a defense. You don't typically back those guys up because you spend a lot of your reserve roster on backing up your running backs, your wide receivers, and getting a good quality backup quarterback. So your tight end, your kicker, your defense often left unbacked up. That means when their bye week comes, you have to go and cut someone off your roster to pick up a backup for those guys. If you have a kicker and a defense on the same bye week, that means you have to cut 2 guys, and it probably means you're going to cut a guy that you don't want to cut. So the less cuts you have to make to satisfy the roster requirements through your bye weeks, the better. That's why you want to be conscious not to double up on bye weeks for your kicker, your defense, and even your tight end if you're not necessarily going to back up your tight end.
All right, and Brad, wrapping up the top 5 pieces of advice, you see this as the year of the tight end. Why?
Yeah, absolutely. Antonio Gates is no longer the standalone Zeus, Jupiter, or dare I say Led Zeppelin of his position. You look at last year, he was not even the number 1 overall tight end in fantasy. Jason Witten grabbed the crown away from Gates. Gates hobbled this year, could start the season on the PUP list. And instead of there being 1 guy in the tier 1 tier, there's actually 6. It's really ballooned. Guys like Dallas Clark, Chris Cooley, Tony Gonzalez, Kellen Winslow, all those guys have now entered the conversation as the elite tight ends at their position. There was 9 guys that averaged over 6 fantasy points per game at the position last year. That's the most this century. I think you're going to continue to see that trend grow. You can avoid Gates and find great running or tight end values in the middle rounds of your fantasy draft.
All right, guys, this is the Fantasy Football Draft Special on Yahoo Sports.